At first glance, Kyle Broflovsky is the moral compass of South Park. He's smart, calm, responsible. Usually, he's the one saying, "Guys, this is a bad idea," while everyone else is already building a catapult to attack the Chinese embassy. He's the first to stand up to Cartman, defends the weak, and fights for truth and justice. But here's the paradox. It's exactly because Kyle is so obsessed with doing the right thing that he ends up breaking the law more than almost any other hero in the show. And he doesn't do it out of greed or cruelty. He does it out of idealism. He'll lie, punch, hack, or even kidnap someone, as long as he believes it's for the greater good. This isn't a story about Kyle being a villain. This is a story about how easy it is to become a criminal when you believe too much in your own righteousness. And at the same time, it's a legal breakdown of how many years Kyle would realistically serve if he lived not in South Park, but in, say, Denver. Kyle versus the system and everyone else. When someone does something wrong, Kyle doesn't stand by. He fights back. But he doesn't follow the rules. He rewrites them. He's the kind of kid who might launch a hacking attack on a government server, punch Cartman square in the face more than once, stage a kidnapping for safety reasons, or accidentally drag his school into an international incident because it was the right thing to do. And each time he's completely convinced he's doing the right thing, that he's a hero, even if the law would call him a suspect on multiple counts. The million-dollar question. What do you do with someone like Kyle? He seems like the good guy. He doesn't hurt people for fun, steal for profit, or cause chaos just to watch it burn. But at the same time, he breaks the law, puts others in danger, sabotages authorities, and creates situations that could easily end in disaster. So we're going to dig deep. The punches, the hacks, the abductions, the protests, the geopolitical disasters. We're going to break them all down and calculate. Spoiler, it probably wouldn't be just one sentence, it'd be multiple back to back. Let's get one thing out of the way. Kyle hits people, a lot. And it's usually Cartman. In fact, if you made a supercut of every time Kyle punched Cartman, it would be longer than most Marvel movies. But here's the catch. Kyle never hits first out of boredom or cruelty. He hits because he's angry, because Cartman is being Cartman, because someone has to do something when the adults inevitably fail. And so, Kyle becomes South Park's unofficial enforcer of justice, a 10-year-old with a short fuse and a moral code that says, violence is wrong, unless I'm doing it for the right reasons. But guess what? The law doesn't care why you punch someone. It only cares that you did. Punching Cartman, not just morally justified. Let's start with the most famous example. Kyle punching Cartman across the face, knocking him into a wall, or slamming him into the ground, usually followed by yelling something like, "You fat racist bastard." And sure, we're all thinking it, but Kyle actually does it. Even though Cartman practically begs for it in legal terms, that's assault, the threat or attempt, and battery, the physical contact. Repeat offenses don't make it more justified. They just make it a pattern. And by our count, Kyle has assaulted Cartman over 30 times across the show's run, not counting times he just kicked him off screen or slammed a door in his face. Violence against other characters. It's not just Cartman. Kyle has punched Stan during a heated fight.
Go.
Hit Butters in a panic, tackled Craig during an argument, and in one episode, bit another student during a school lockdown. In each case, he was provoked, sure, but again, provocation doesn't erase the law. Imagine being a kid at South Park Elementary and hearing, "Hey, Kyle's mad. Stay back. He might deck you." That's not a moral leader. That's someone the principal should be very concerned about. Attacking adults. Yes, he did that too. And yes, Kyle's also hit adults. He slapped Mr. Garrison, thrown things at cops, and once even kicked a Canadian ambassador in the shin. Legally speaking, that's assault on a public official, assault on law enforcement, and in some states, a felony offense even for minors. Even if Kyle's just doing what's right, the court isn't going to say, "Well, Officer Jenkins was being kind of a jerk. Dismissed." What would a real court say? Let's assume Kyle's crimes happened in Colorado, where South Park is canonically located. Under Colorado law, simple battery by a juvenile, up to 6 months per incident. Assault on a public employee, 1 year minimum. Repeat juvenile offenders, eligible for placement in secure youth facilities. Now let's be generous and say half of Kyle's punches were mutual conflict. That still leaves 15 plus clear instances of unlawful violence, not even counting intimidation and threats. Total estimated sentence? 2 to 3 years in juvenile detention, or 1 year plus probation plus mandatory counseling. And yes, and this is the good kid, the hero with a right hook. The irony of all this is that Kyle genuinely believes he's doing the right thing. And sometimes, he kind of is. After all, Cartman has faked genocides, impersonated the Pope, and once tried to start a race war.
It's on! Race war! Race war! Race war!
But justice by fist is still vigilantism, and when it's coming from a kid who claims to respect the law, that's not heroism. That's hypocrisy with a closed fist. You'd think that in a town like South Park, where most people can barely operate a toaster, a 10-year-old kid knowing how to hack into complex digital systems would be impressive. And it is. But it's also a felony. Because while Kyle may be the brainy one of the group, the rational thinker, the moral compass, the kid most likely to understand how a firewall works, he also uses that intelligence to break into computers, override security systems, and sabotage digital networks more times than we can count. And he never does it for money or power. No, that would make him a villain. Kyle does it because someone is being unfair, abusing power, or deserves it. You know who else says that in court? Hackers. Just less polite ones. Hacking for justice is still hacking. Let's go back to the time Kyle hacked into the school's computer system. Why? Because the grading software was broken and he wanted to fix it by changing the results himself. That's unauthorized access of protected systems, tampering with official academic records. And if you're doing it on school property, possibly federal jurisdiction, because most school networks are funded through public education grants. It doesn't matter that he had good intentions. In the real world, that's academic fraud and cybercrime. Full stop. Breaking into government systems. In a different episode, Kyle joins Stan in accessing a satellite defense database, using a stolen password, a laptop, and what might as well be military-grade hacking skills. This isn't a joke. That's unauthorized access of federal systems, a violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. In real life, that's the same law used to prosecute whistleblowers and black hat hackers. And they're doing this in the 4th grade. The Troll Trace saga. Let's not forget Kyle's central role in the Troll Trace arc. He attempts to take down an international surveillance operation by hacking into their infrastructure. With zero clearance, zero supervision, and a moral justification that basically boils down to they were being mean online. Does that sound noble? Sure. Does that hold up in court? Not unless the judge also believes 10-year-olds should be allowed to launch global cyber attacks in the name of online decency. Charges here would include international cybercrime, electronic sabotage, and violation of multiple digital privacy laws. Minimum sentence: 5 years in juvenile detention, even for attempted intrusion. If any foreign governments get involved, it gets very messy. But Kyle was trying to help. Yes, we get it. Kyle's motivations are almost always about protecting others, defending justice, or correcting the system. But here's the cold legal reality. Motivation doesn't erase the crime. If you hack into a database and steal files, even if you don't leak them, it's still illegal. If you alter data to make it more fair, you've still committed fraud. And if you collaborate with others to do it across borders, that's a federal investigation waiting to happen. Even if you're in 4th grade and wear a little green hat, estimated sentence. Let's tally it up. Hacking school systems, 1 to 2 years. Breaking into federal or surveillance networks, 3 to 5 years. International digital interference, 3 to 7 years depending on damage. Realistically, Kyle would likely face 5 to 7 years in juvenile detention, probation until adulthood, permanent restriction from using networked computers unsupervised. Yes, the good kid, the brain of the group, the moral compass, would be in deep legal trouble if this weren't a cartoon. By now, we've established that Kyle Broflovsky is the kind of kid who thinks he knows what's best for everyone. And sometimes he's right. Cartman probably shouldn't be allowed near the internet, but there's a fine line between doing what's right and deciding what rights other people get to keep. And Kyle crosses that line more than once. Because when logic, arguments, and moral superiority don't work, Kyle resorts to force. Not violence this time, but containment, isolation, straight-up illegal imprisonment. In his mind, he's preventing disaster. In the eyes of the law, that's kidnapping. Let's talk about Cartman again. Cartman has been many things: a racist, a liar, a chaos agent, and occasionally a literal dictator. But here's the thing. He's still legally a person. That didn't stop Kyle from locking him in a shed for everyone's safety, tricking him into getting into a vehicle, then driving him miles away and abandoning him, holding him against his will until he agreed to behave, threatening him with confinement unless he followed certain rules. And just because it was Cartman doesn't make it legal. Under US law, this is called unlawful imprisonment, abduction, deprivation of liberty, and if deception was involved, constructive kidnapping. Even if no harm was done physically, the act of taking away someone's freedom without legal cause is a serious juvenile offense. Not just Cartman. Group detainment for the greater good. In another episode, Kyle helps trap an entire group of kids in a gymnasium during a moral intervention. He and Stan believe the others are being brainwashed by a corporate scheme, so they lock the doors, cut the power, and refuse to let anyone leave until they see reason. That's not leadership. That's a hostage situation. Even if Kyle's not holding a weapon, legally this would still be considered illegal detainment, false imprisonment, reckless endangerment, and depending on how long it lasted, possibly child endangerment. Again, no one was hurt physically. But the trauma, the emotional stress, a prosecutor would eat that up like it was catered by Whole Foods. But I was protecting them. That's Kyle's go-to defense. And yes, in the logic of South Park, he often is the most rational person in the room. But in real courts, protective intent doesn't cancel out criminal action. If a person kidnaps someone to keep them safe, that's still kidnapping. If you detain people because they're making bad choices, congratulations. You just crossed into vigilante territory. Even if Kyle didn't mean to traumatize anyone, he still restricted their movement, ignored their protests, assumed authority he didn't have, used deception and manipulation to achieve it. Psychological manipulation equals legal trouble. Let's not ignore that Kyle doesn't always use physical force. Sometimes he uses guilt, fear, and public shaming to isolate people. Examples: telling kids their beliefs make them dangerous and unfit to be around others. Using staged events to make someone believe they're mentally unstable. Gaslighting Cartman into believing he's being watched by the government to control his actions. While this falls more into emotional coercion, in certain contexts, it could still be seen as psychological abuse, coercive control, and malicious manipulation, especially if minors are involved. And when these tactics are used to justify detainment, the court would not be sympathetic. Estimated legal consequences. Let's break it down. Unlawful imprisonment, Cartman incidents, 1 to 3 years. Group detainment at school, 2 to 4 years. Coercive manipulation, additional 6 to 12 months, possibly more if proven traumatic. Repeat offense status, harsher sentencing, likely no probation. Realistic outcome, 4 to 6 years in juvenile detention. Court-mandated therapy, possible court order banning unsupervised contact with targets of prior incidents. And that's with the judge believing he had good intentions. Kyle may think he's saving people, but in a real-world legal system, he'd be labeled as a danger to others, even if he thinks he's the only one trying to help. At this point, Kyle Broflovsky has already established himself as a righteous hacker, an occasional vigilante, and a moral authority with anger issues. But in true South Park fashion, things don't stay local. No, Kyle doesn't stop at playground justice. He goes international. Because when something is unjust on a global scale, Kyle takes matters into his own hands, whether it's through international sabotage, cyber warfare, or directly confronting foreign governments. In the real world, this would trigger diplomatic outrage, possible extradition, and in some cases, war crimes tribunals. But in South Park, it's just another Tuesday. Canada, the first casualty of Kyle's foreign policy. Let's start with the time Kyle got directly involved in encouraging an economic boycott of Canada and negotiating with foreign representatives using a sock puppet and sarcasm. And while that may sound harmless, in real-world terms, acting as an unauthorized diplomat is actually a crime. According to the Logan Act, yes, it's real, U.S. citizens are not allowed to negotiate with foreign governments without proper authorization. Kyle, age 10, not only negotiated, but restructured an entire international labor standoff. That's violation of international diplomacy laws. Unauthorized negotiation with a foreign power. Interference with foreign political affairs. Real-world penalty? Fines, surveillance, and potential federal charges depending on the outcome. China, Kyle goes full anti-communist. In the now infamous Banned in China episode, Kyle becomes involved in resisting Chinese censorship. This includes participating in public anti-China statements, helping smuggle banned media, and encouraging others to resist pressure from Chinese investors. In real life, these actions would get you detained in foreign territory if caught, banned from international travel, and possibly trigger retaliatory measures from the foreign government. To be clear, the U.S. government wouldn't prosecute Kyle for criticizing China, but his direct involvement in smuggling information and promoting unrest could make him a national security risk, at least on paper. Minimum outcome: placement on a government watch list, school expulsion, and a very awkward parent-teacher conference with the CIA. The Troll War, global digital sabotage. Kyle's involvement in the Troll Trace saga wasn't limited to local systems. He helped take down an international digital surveillance operation with servers located around the world. This involved unauthorized access of foreign networks, collaboration with hackers across borders, and taking part in what was effectively a form of digital warfare. Under real-world cybersecurity treaties, this would qualify as cyber sabotage, violation of international sovereignty, and potentially a terrorist-level cyber offense, even if his intentions were good. Even juvenile offenders involved in global-scale cyber attacks are helped organize it. Estimated sentence: 7 to 10 years in federal juvenile detention, international interrogation, lifelong restriction from foreign travel. But he was stopping evil! Yes, Kyle always believes he's stopping something worse, whether it's propaganda, censorship, or evil corporations. He sees himself as the lone sane voice in a world gone mad. But that kind of thinking, when paired with action, turns into something very heroic intent. It just sees unauthorized influence, foreign interference, and international threat behavior. The real-world verdict. Let's total it up. Canada interference, 1 to 2 years. Anti-China smuggling, media resistance, 2 to 4 years. Cyber sabotage, troll trace, 7 to 10 years. Unauthorized diplomacy, repeat offenses, additional 1 to 3 years. Estimated sentence, 10 to 15 years, depending on how the international courts feel about a fourth grader dismantling their systems. And remember, that's without any physical violence. Just diplomatic chaos, high-level cybercrime, and unlicensed foreign policy. Kyle Broflovsky doesn't just argue with authority. He actively works against it. When a rule is unjust, he breaks it. When a law is stupid, he mocks it. When a system fails people, he tries to take it down himself. In many ways, he's the kind of kid you might see on a protest poster. Brave, principled, defiant. But in real life, civil disobedience comes with consequences, especially when it crosses the line into outright sabotage, disruption of public services, and interference with official operations. Kyle may think he's a reformer, but to the legal system, he's a serial disruptor with a growing rap sheet. School rules, Kyle has left the chat. Let's start with school, the battlefield where Kyle wages most of his early wars.
Did it bother you that I was happy? Is that why you took her from me, Cam?
Cartman, you weren't happy.
Shut up, Cal!
All you did was bitch about her all the time.
You're not gonna talk your way out of this one. This is the end, Cam. It's you or me.
Come on, Cartman.
You took everything!
Across multiple episodes, he organizes unauthorized walkouts, refuses to take mandatory standardized tests, sabotages school assemblies by hijacking microphones, publicly insults teachers and administrators during official events, and encourages other students to defy instructions en masse. While the messages are often noble, standing against censorship, unfair grading, or toxic trends, the methods are pure disruption. Under most state laws, this qualifies as willful defiance of authority, school disruption, incitement to rebellion, and interference with educational operations. Penalties can include suspension or expulsion, juvenile misdemeanor charges, mandatory behavioral reform programs. As Kyle takes on the government, in several episodes, Kyle doesn't just resist school rules. He goes after actual governmental policy. Highlights include sabotaging census data collection, refusing to comply with local ordinances, mask mandates, zoning, etc., hacking into government systems, again, to fix a public problem, filing fake paperwork to stop construction of a megacorporation headquarters, encouraging citizen process. Legally, that becomes obstruction of government operations, falsification of public records, cyber interference with civil infrastructure, unlawful interference in legislative or corporate proceedings. That's a mouthful, yes, but more importantly, it's also a case file. Realistically, 2 to 4 years of juvenile supervision with probation, public demonstrations, or public chaos. Kyle is no stranger to organizing protests. He's led marches without permits, created makeshift blockades around public buildings, shut down school events by force, and in one instance, built a giant puppet shaped like a corrupt school official and paraded it through town during a PTA meeting. Harmless? Maybe in South Park logic, but in the real world, that's unlawful assembly, obstruction of public access, property damage, fines and probation. Maximum 1 to 2 years in juvenile detention, especially if anyone was endangered or property damaged. The court doesn't care about the message. That's the hard truth Kyle never seems to accept. You can be 100% morally correct, make valid, brilliant arguments, expose actual corruption, get standing ovations from your classmates. But the legal system still asks, did you break the law? Did you interfere with public systems? Did you endanger others in the process? And if the answer is yes, even with noble intent, the outcome is the same. Kyle sees himself as a tiny revolutionary, but to a judge, he's a well-spoken, dangerously influential rule breaker. Estimated sentence summary. From school disruption to government sabotage. Education system interference, 1 year. Public process manipulation, 2 to 4 years. Unauthorized demonstrations, 1 to 2 years. Repeat offender status. Additional probation and monitoring. Realistic total, 4 to 6 years, with mandatory reform programs, court oversight, and likely a ban on organizing public gatherings without approval. All for trying to make the system better. When it comes to doing what's right, Kyle doesn't stop at protesting rules or hacking into systems. Sometimes he tries to fix the whole planet. Climate change? Corporate greed? Overconsumption? If there's a global crisis, Kyle wants to stop it, personally. The problem is, Kyle doesn't always understand how economics, infrastructure, or environmental regulation actually work. So when he tries to help, he ends up triggering unintended chaos, collapsing entire businesses, and occasionally destroying protected natural resources. In a cartoon, that's brave and inspiring. In real life, that's multiple felonies and probably a class action lawsuit. The Whole Foods crisis. Let's start with Kyle's infamous campaign to boycott Whole Foods. After discovering they manipulate charitable donations for tax breaks, he launches a town-wide protest, sets up picket lines, and convinces half the population to abandon the store. What happens next? The store shuts down. Dozens of people lose jobs. The town's economy tanks. Local small businesses that relied on the store's traffic collapse. This is what economists call a shock to the local ecosystem. And when a miner leads it, without permits, planning, or economic analysis, it becomes economic sabotage. Real-world charges could include organized interference with commerce, incitement to economic harm, intentional disruption of licensed business operations. Outcome? Civil lawsuits, restitution to affected businesses. Potential state-level charges for inciting economic damage, minimum juvenile penalty, 1 to 2 years probation, and possibly court-ordered community restitution for economic disruption. Environmental activism or ecological vandalism? In another episode, Kyle joins a group of kids trying to save the trees. Noble cause, sure, except they break into private land, chain themselves to protected areas, damage construction equipment, sabotage machinery, pour paint on developers' offices. That's not environmental protection. That's eco-terrorism, at least by legal definition. Even minors who commit these actions face trespassing on restricted lands, destruction of property, environmental sabotage, obstruction of legal construction projects. This isn't a slap-on-the-wrist offense. In the U.S., eco-sabotage is treated seriously, especially if it halts state-funded operations. Estimated sentence, 3 to 5 years with additional fines for property damage. Playing with the free market. Kyle also has a bad habit of trying to regulate the economy himself. In one storyline, he attempts to equalize candy prices by creating an underground candy exchange and redistributing sweets from wealthier kids to poorer ones. It's played as a parody of socialism, but it also involved theft, price manipulation, creation of a black market, threats of candy embargoes, and one case of forged currency. Let's just say this isn't the kind of business class lesson schools usually teach. Under law, this is theft and redistribution of goods, black market organization, counterfeiting, even if it's candy money, conspiracy to defraud. In a real case, even a juvenile would face 1 to 3 years for black market activities, additional charges for forgery or false tender, financial education courses, and behavioral reform programs. The pattern, Kyle means well, but what ties all of this together is Kyle's unwavering belief that he's doing the right thing. That's what makes him dangerous, because every time he causes chaos, whether by sinking a business, vandalizing construction sites, or collapsing the entire Halloween economy over candy injustice, he walks away believing it was justified. And that belief is exactly what a court would not accept as a defense. Legal breakdown. Let's sum up the eco-economic damage. Whole Foods sabotage, 2 years. Environmental vandalism, 3 to 5 years. Underground candy economy, 1 to 2 years. Repeat offender status. Harsher sentencing, reduced leniency. Realistic total, 6 to 9 years depending on the state, damages, and how many angry adults show up to testify. And remember, this isn't even counting emotional damages or community response. Kyle might walk out of juvenile court, but he'd be walking into a crowd of unemployed citizens and bulldozed trees. After dissecting Kyle Broflovski's long history of assaults, cybercrimes, kidnappings, sabotage, international chaos, and economic disruption, the big question remains. If Kyle lived in the real world, how long would he actually spend in juvenile detention? To answer that, we need to step back and recognize a crucial truth. Kyle isn't evil. He's not doing these things for profit, cruelty, or power. He acts from moral outrage, from a deep sense of justice, and from the belief that someone has to stand up when no one else will. And in some cases, he's right. But in a court of law, intention is not immunity. Tallying the charges, let's review what he's accumulated over the years. Repeated assault and battery, 2 to 3 years. Cybercrime and hacking, 5 to 7 years. Kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment, 4 to 6 years. International interference and diplomacy violations, 10 to 15 years. School and government sabotage, 4 to 6 years. Eco-vandalism and economic damage, 6 to 9 years. If you added that up as consecutive time, you're looking at 31 to 46 years in juvenile detention or correctional programs. Of course, the real legal system doesn't usually sentence minors to stacked decades of incarceration, especially when rehabilitation is an option. So let's break it down with real-world reasoning. The realistic legal outcome. In a court that sees Kyle as a repeat offender, a minor with a history of social disruption, and a potential one who works within the system instead of trying to blow it up every other week. In other words, Kyle doesn't belong in prison forever. but he definitely needs a very long time out. Final verdict? If South Park were a documentary, Kyle Broflovsky would likely be serving 10 years in juvenile detention, followed by strict probation and lifelong supervision. So the next time someone calls him the good kid, remember, being smart and moral doesn't make you innocent, especially when you keep breaking federal law before your voice is even cracked.